Welcome to the third episode of How Did They Do That? I'm your host, black and white dedicated photographer DavidLPayne. It's a pleasure to have you join us today. Here we have an informal conversation with a black and white artist to learn how they took one of their images straight out of the camera all the way to the finished product. And maybe they'll share a few tips with you along the way. Before I introduce our guest, I want to take a moment and send out some special thanks to Teresa from Vero and Keith from our YouTube channel. With this new series, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback and a lot of great comments on how did they do that. And I wanted to share the comments both from Teresa and Keith, which you see on your screen. Thank you both for your wonderful support and your great feedback on our new series. We're happy you're finding our efforts helpful to your black and white photography. Today, we're having a conversation with Clive Stones from the UK. Clive and I have known each other and been photography friends for a little over 3 years now. And it is a real honor and a pleasure to welcome him to our show. Clive, thank you for joining us and sharing some of your black and white photography creative workflow. Why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about yourself and your photography.
Thank you, Dev. As you say, I think 3 going on 4 years now. Got to know each other way back on that platform that we won't mention anymore. I think for me, wow, where did my photography journey start? I think I've always had a camera in my hands since I've been probably in my 20s and my 30s. Going back to compact little digital things, nothing overly fancy, but just that wanting to capture whatever's there in front of you. It just intrigued my mind. But I think my real passion took off back in around about 2018. I picked up my first digital SLR, which back then was the Canon 80D with a couple of kit lenses. Have to say it was courtesy of my employer. I'd just done 25-year service and I got a big bonus, and it's like, hey, that's going into my camera. So for me, that's where my journey really, really kicked off. And I think ever since then, it's just, I don't know why I set myself this challenge. If it moves or it's small, I want to take a picture of it. And I sit here now and go, why did I do that? Why didn't I just, decide to do something very static and it's like, yeah, but it's a challenge. It was always being outside. I love being outdoors, the fresh air, that tranquility sometimes. And I think as well, photography for me, it makes you stop and slow down. Enjoy what's around you and actually look at what's around you, not just walk past things. And I'm sure you're the same with your genre of street and buildings and architecture and, the macro that we both enjoy. It makes you stop and look. So that's me. Currently, what am I shooting at the minute? We'll come on to that a little bit later, but I'm still with Canon. I've stuck with Canon ever since that first DSLR. So what I'm sure we'll touch on what I'm shooting at the minute a little bit later on.
Well, like Sebastião Salgado says, if you want to be a photographer, you got to remember one thing. It's not the camera or the gear. It's the person behind the camera. So that's what's important. Why, just out of curiosity, why did you go into black and white?
Can I sit here and say I feel a little bit of a fraud at sometimes when we're talking about me being a black and white photographer? Because In the main, I'm not. I am definitely a color photographer, but enjoy black and white with a passion. I enjoy watching, or rather looking at other people's black and white work. And I know some of my images, I'll always process both. I'll always do my color process first, and then I'll have a play around with black and white. If I see something within that image, I'm thinking, this may look better. This may look nice in black and white. Let's have a look. So at my very end process of all of my edits is let's have a quick play with black and white. And if I think it's going somewhere, I will spend time then looking at that one and taking it and forgetting the color version of it. There's a color layer sitting behind it, but the black and white layer is the one that then I'll spend hours potentially editing through. Um, so speaking to you, who I know is a pure dedicated B&W photographer nowadays, I do feel a touch of a fraud, but I know I'm not. But I think for me, it's that contrast, it's that light and dark, and even with nature and wildlife, you can create some good black and white photography that the color doesn't always have to speak up loudest. It can be that contrasting light and dark.
Yeah, color is beautiful, but it's interesting because for me, it's about the real essence of a subject, and that tends to be brought out much stronger, I feel, in black and white. But
Mhm.
I'm glad that you've picked it up. The photo we're gonna look at today is one of my favorites of yours, so I'm glad we're gonna chat about it.
Well, I know you have a passion, and you've always admired some of my, without letting the cat out of the bag as to what we're looking at with my birds of prey. You've always enjoyed them, and especially the owls. And I think this particular one we're going to look at later, it helps simplify that image and it makes you focus on the subject. And, as we talk about it, the light on that day was good, but it wasn't brilliant. The image itself was pretty clear, pretty crisp, and I could have done a lot with it in color, but actually it just needed to be stripped back, taken into its black and white form, and go, now you can make out everything that's happening. And that's why I love it.
Okay, everyone, you heard the man. It's time for us to get to work. Clive, the image that you shared with us, what was it about the scene that caught your eye at first glance?
Wow. So as you well know, and you've seen from many of my posts over the years, Dave, birds of prey, owls especially, I have a passion about trying to capture. There's something very special about whether it be out in the wild or in this case at a bird of prey centre, watching and understanding how birds of prey operate. You don't see, I don't, I don't walk around the UK and see some of these nice big fancy owls or birds of prey like some of the Americas do, or you know, other parts of Europe get, but we do have some pretty good ones. I have been fortunate enough to see quite a few owls out in the wild in the UK, but this particular one was taken at a bird of prey centre. It's a conservation centre. They fly their birds. They they educate people about their birds of prey, where they've come from, the persecution that they go through, and everything. So I know this place pretty well. But this isn't one of the big fancy birds. This is a beautiful UK barn owl. And the barn owl for me is just the essence of owls here in the UK. They're really badly done to. They have been sadly persecuted, and there's not that many breeding pairs now out in the wild here. So to be able to go to this centre, understand how they're going to fly them, hear them educate the other people that are there, and ultimately be able to take beautiful photographs of them in fairly close proximity is something you cannot do out in the wild unless you set up hides and spend weeks and weeks, stalking these things, and then you'd be lucky if you get to see one. So for me, it's spending that time with something I enjoy doing, with a subject matter that is there on tap, but at the same time, I don't hide that. I would never post this picture and say this was taken in the wild. I wouldn't
Yeah.
do that. It's not what I'm about. But at least mention where it was taken, and promote the birds of prey centres and those conservation organisations that are out there and trying to help our native species as much as the world population as well. So um, it was one that through this flying demo, the handler said, right, we're going to now get um, bird of prey to actually do its hover. Now, the barn owl is one of the few birds, other than sort of the kestrel, that can actually do a semi-hover. It's a stall, it stops and looks down and then starts again. Whereas if you ever see a European kestrel, they can literally stop and hover and don't move. The heads just keep focused on whatever it is they're looking at. The barn owl will stall, it will stop, it will hover for a few seconds, and then move over to one side or the other and do it again. And it was just that perfect moment. It was there in front of me, 15, 20 feet away. Perfect opportunity.
It's it's a phenomenal photo. I showed it to a couple of my friends, and we looked at the before and the after, and they were really amazed by the detail and the texture that you were able
Mhm.
to bring out in the black and white editing or post-processing of it, that just it makes it stunning. Speaking of that, let let me ask you one gear question. Which brand and model camera did you use? Which lens? And did you use any filters when you were taking the shot?
So, as I alluded to a minute ago, I've always been a Canon boy. I just get on with them. So I've always stuck to brand, and I'm now shooting a Canon R5, so I've gone mirrorless. I went mirrorless 2 or 3 years ago. Beautiful camera, really, really fast shutter. Um, the lens actually on this particular photo was my older 100-400 EF lens, so I haven't upgraded my lenses to the mirrorless RF lenses when I took this particular image. I have done
Wow.
subsequently. So that was actually shot with a 100-400 and the converter just to put it onto the RF body. But to be honest, that lens was a brilliant lens in its own right. Um, and I could pick it up now. My camera sits there in front of me pretty much all day long, regardless of where, if I'm here at home working from home, my camera is just to my left hand side. And it has my now 100-500 lens permanently on there, just in case.
Wow.
Um, As far as filters, I'll say rarely. That's a lie. I don't use filters. For the types of imagery I take, I need the camera to be ready. So to work out what filter I may need or I may not need when you're shooting against skies that are changing all the time, if it's a bird in flight, yes, some people will love polarizing lenses on there to dull down that sky, but for me, it's trying to compensate all the time. So I'd rather do it with shutter speed and aperture.
Okay.
People will always tell you there's a best way to take a wildlife image. And I've listened and I've read and I've gone through it and I've tried them. And I still come back to the point. For me, it's understand your camera, understand what you're trying to do, and play around with your own settings and find something that works. Yes, take the advice, try it, see if it works for you, but don't be scared that that's the only thing you can do. Um,
That's an excellent point because if you think about it, I mean, you'd go crazy trying to adopt all the all the really latest, for example, YouTube ideas or, "Oh, you gotta have this," or, "If you really wanna take your camera level up, you gotta go." I love the way you said it. Find what works for you. It's okay to try new stuff. You should try
yeah,
new things. But at the end of the day, if it's not comfortable and it's not giving you something additional, stick with what make you comfortable, what you shoot. With those big lenses, just out of curiosity, did you use a tripod or was that handheld?
Handheld. The vast majority of what I take will either be handheld or potentially with a monopod, but
Wow.
never a tripod. For me, again, it's not quite knowing when you set yourself out for a day. You know, if I'm going out for a long walk or even going to the bird of prey centre, you need to be able to move around. So the
Good
tripod
point.
to then set it up, you've got the three legs and get it all out, and it's like, right, no, I'm in the wrong place. I need to be over there. So the monopod isn't too bad. You know, you can move quite quickly with the mono. Um, but if I know, I'm pretty sure that on this particular occasion, it was all handheld. I had the monopod probably leant against my leg at the side of me or on the floor. I had it with me. But to do all of the panning and the moving around and trying to capture some of the other birds that were on show that day in flight, it's just too hard to do it with the mono even. So pretty much handheld all the way.
Wow, that conversation leads to another question that just popped up. What settings do you apply to your camera or do you use in your camera for your style of photography, especially this photo?
I think, well, for my style of photography in general, um, I can guarantee if I picked my camera up now, it would and turned it on. Shutter speed would be around about 500, 640, around about there. Um,
Okay.
Always shooting manual. And again, for me, I try and control my camera with shutter speed, but it's always in manual. So if I need to nudge the aperture up or down, I can do just to get that little bit more light or depth of field. But predominantly, I focus purely on shutter speed. How light or dark is it out there? Am I shooting against the sky? Am I shooting against a background? And hopefully, I can then just find that sweet spot of a fast enough shutter speed to not get too much blur and try and capture everything as crisp as possible when something's moving, but without making it too dark at the same time. This particular one, as I said earlier, the lighting was pretty bright that day, but it was against a really dull grey sky. But
Yeah.
the sun was just there behind it, and there was nothing. It was a featureless, bright grey sky, which here in the UK you've got to get used to shooting with. Um, so that particular shot was taken at 16 hundredths of a second, 1,600th of a second.
Wow.
Um, ISO, because again it was so bright and I was shooting against that sky, 250. So I was lucky I could get it down low. And then the f-stop would have been around about 7.1-ish, around about there. And that particular one was on, bear in mind I've got 400 lens on that particular camera on the day. It was shot at 260. So it wasn't that far away, and it literally was full for, the image you see hasn't been particularly cropped. It is just there. That's where it was. My metering is usually set on average. If I know where I'm shooting and I know I'm going to be able to track something really, really well, I'll put it on center. If I'm confident in my own ability that day and I know I can keep something in the middle of my camera, I'll put it on center spot average. This particular one, everything that day was moving so fast apart from the barn owl, and I just hadn't got around to changing it, so it was still on partial meter.
Yeah, the metering choice is of particular interest to me because having just moved from digital and gone back to my future, so to speak, into film, the metering choices I'm learning pretty widely based on what I'm shooting. For
Mm,
urban minimalism, it's spot metering because I
mhm,
wanna pick that one thing and make sure that the shadow light and the impact is just right, and that's what I'll meter for. On street, I'm more center weighted,
mhm,
and for macro, black and white macro, on my Nikon film cameras, I'm going to matrix metering because
mhm,
you can do spot, but since I always frame my macro shots in a square format, one by one,
Hmm.
I find that Matrix does an awfully good job of pulling in the center beautifully and then giving me enough light on the framework. So it it's really, for me, it's situation dependent as to
I would
which
agree.
style I use.
I would completely agree. I know I can go to, and I'm trying to plan my next trip to a place called Benton Cliffs here in the UK. And you'll have seen in the years gone past where big gannets, puffins, and razorbills all sit there on the cliff face at this time of year. Gannets for me are beautiful birds. They soar across the cliff face. They're just effortless, but they're not particularly quick moving when they're doing that. So for me, I can spot focus on them. They're a big white
Yeah,
bird. The spot focus on the bird, and I know I can track that at a relatively decent pace. If I'm shooting, as I was here that day on the Bird of Prey Centre, I think the bird before was some type of falcon. It was doing very quick dives and swoops and then the likes across the ground. And if I'd have been spot focusing on that, I'd have been spot focused on a tree. And then the bird's over here somewhere, and it's like, yeah, that's dark. That's what I say about my own ability some days. If I know I can keep something center focused in the frame, then I can spot focus on it, or spot meter on it rather. If it's going to be a little bit too quick, what's the point? Let the camera do the work for you. They're very good at it.
that's a good
I'm
point.
blessed, I am blessed with the R5. It's got a huge sensor. It's got a wickedly quick shutter rate, and it handles noise particularly well. I've had that up at some really extreme limits, looked at something on the screen and gone, I can use this image. Whereas in the back of
Excellent.
my head before, you would have gone, that's a reference shot only.